luckily this is all science, right? So it's not subjective, it's all very objective. So when you explain it to them, especially if, maybe after today you listen to this podcast and you never understood that's what's happening. You never understood it was high velocity, low pressure, and that's why air comes out of the solution. Maybe now when you talk to that customer intelligently about it, they're going to trust you and they're going to go look it up and realize it's real. Sometimes that doesn't work and they don't believe you, and then you have to actually pressure test it and show them, look, it's not leaking, but it still has air bubbles, and this is all it can be, because that's really all it can be.
This is episode 140 with Justin Bowie of JMax Plumbing. Enjoy.
Welcome to your go-to podcast for the pool and spa industry. My name is Tyler Rasmussen.
And my name is Greg Viafania. And this is the Pool Chasers Podcast.
All right, Justin, well, thanks for being in the podcast again with us. We appreciate you coming down.
Yeah, thanks for having me. 3 times.
Three times.
Am I the most revisits or what?
You are.
Nice, solid. Feels good.
Yes, welcome back.
Thanks.
So we received a ton of great feedback, on episode 109, which you were on with us. And we were kind of talking the other day about how you got several questions and things like that from people after they listened to the episode. So we wanted to really answer those today, which we'll get to. But first, can you give us kind of a refresher on what hydraulics is exactly?
Absolutely. So hydraulics is basically the properties of water and their characteristics inside of a plumbing system. So all the plumbing fittings, pipe, the sizes, the elevations of the equipment, the features, that all plays a part in hydraulics.
Sweet. And what are some more common hydraulic terms we should know?
Okay, so when we're going to talk today, these are some things that are very basic that everybody should know. So this is the terminology. So GPM, that stands for gallons per minute. When we talk about GPM, we're talking about the capacity of different pipe sizes to carry water, or the capacity of certain water features or elements in the pool and what they can do in terms of gallons per minute, what they can flow. Velocity is how quickly we're moving water in the plumbing system. And you'll hear later in this podcast most likely why that's important, but that's something that we focus on when we're looking at plumbing and hydraulics. Friction loss is when water is moving through a plumbing system. It's the resistance that's created by the water that is turning. It's has friction on the inside walls of the pipe as it passes through increase or decrease in size. All those things are friction loss. So those are the things that we're trying to minimize when we're talking about plumbing and hydraulics. A pump curve, if you go to any manufacturer's website and you look up tech data, the pump curve will be available for any of their pumps. And what the pump curve tells you is at any specific head, total dynamic head, what that pump will produce in terms of gallons per minute. And the reason that's important is because you want to be able to match a pump and the expected or desired flow rate, your total dynamic head of their system. So becoming familiar with pump curves and understanding what each pump will do at any given head is important. You can kind of, look through those and get an understanding of where each manufacturer is with each of their pumps, because some pumps are low head, medium head, high head. So it's important to understand what a pump curve is and how that relates to plumbing. A friction loss chart is the pipe manufacturers will give you a chart that tells you at any given velocity how much head is produced in their pipe at a 100-foot length. So this friction loss chart, readily available online. You can go to Crestline or Charlotte Pipe or anybody. You can look up friction loss chart. They'll give it to you in feet of head. And like I said, they're telling you if you're moving water at 4 feet per second, every time it passes through a 100-foot length of pipe, this is how many feet of head that's giving you sometimes they will say it in pressure drop, and we'll talk about this here in a minute, but you can convert pressure drop to head. You always want to get everything to head because that's how we work in the hydraulic and plumbing side. Water in transit, this is another basic term that everybody should know. Water in transit means water that's moving, water that's not in the pool, water that's moving through the plumbing system, through the filters, through the pumps, and through gutter systems or gravity collection. So we're going to look probably at some of the water in transit situations, but that's another basic terminology that everybody should get their head around, because it's not just the volume of water in a pool, it's the volume of water in your plumbing, and sometimes that number can be significant. There's also some numbers that everybody should know when we're talking about hydraulics or plumbing. 2.31, This is a number that we use to convert pressure drop to head. So if you had a pressure drop of, let's say, 6 pounds on a specific item, and when I say pressure drop, the way you measure pressure drop is you put basically, this is very basic terminology, but you would put a pressure gauge before said item and then after item. And if the pressure dropped 2 pounds from the time it went before to after that, you would multiply that times 2.31, and that would tell you how many feet of head that particular component produced. And that would change the faster you move water through it. So 2.31, that's the number we use to convert pressure drop to feet of head. On the vacuum side or on the suction side, to find head restriction there, it's 1.13 times your vacuum reading. So same goes for there, but just remember that's a number you need to know, 1.13. 7.48, that's how many gallons are in a cubic foot of water. We use that all the time. That's a number that is stuck with us. It's very basic. Got to know that number, and we'll show you a little bit later on why. And then one principle, I think when I was learning or became interested in hydraulics and was kind of involved in it, there's one concept you got to get your head around, which is interesting, and it'll help you understand why certain things work the way they do. And it's that when you think of a pump in a plumbing system, the pump is not pulling water in. It's not physically pulling on the water. What it's doing is it's creating a vacuum. It's creating low pressure. The way that water moves in a plumbing system is it wants to move from high pressure to low pressure. So it's trying to equalize. So what the pump's doing is it's lowering the pressure on the suction side, which means that all of the water that's out in the pool and in the plumbing system that is open to atmosphere, which is under pressure, it's trying to move into that low pressure zone in the pump. And then as it passes through the impeller, the pump is pressurizing it. So it's pushing water out at a higher pressure, and it's trying to escape through the plumbing to all of the low pressure zones in the plumbing system or in the pool. So if you can get your head around that, the pump's not actually pulling it. It's just creating a low pressure and a high pressure on the suction and return. And that's number one. When I got into it, I didn't understand that at all. It didn't make any sense. And then as you start to get into it, you're like, wow, that makes sense. And then it kind of makes sense when you build manifolds and stuff like that, why things act the way they do.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the terms are very critical when it comes to speaking the language and communicating within the industry and with homeowners. So what about like hydraulic calculations that everybody should know and that you probably use every day?
Yeah, so the basic ones that everybody should know or that everybody could use every day, I'll give you some like GPM ranges for common products in a pool. So a suction skimmer would operate between a GPM range of 27 to 54 gallons per minute. Deck jets, 5 to 10 gallons per minute. Surface returns, you want to try and get 20 gallons a minute to each surface return for them to be effective. Now, remember, these are very basic. There are circumstances where you would manipulate these numbers, but these are all very
right.
Standard style shear descents. So these are your plastic shears. It's 11 gallons per minute per foot. Custom, Bowie style smooth flow scuppers, they're 25 to 30 gallons a minute a foot. So you'll see a lot of people, they'll upgrade from a plastic shear, which is 11 gallons a foot. They'll go to like a Bowie. It's more than double the GPM required. So it's important that you know that. Therapy jets, 15 to 25 gallons a minute each. MDX debris removal drain, 90 to 132 gallons a minute. And then you can move up to the A&A channel drain, which in the single suction configuration, it's 237 gallons a minute on the floor and 167 on the wall. So those are GPM ranges that every single day we're using those when we're building plumbing systems. You got to really have your head around the demand, because if you don't know the demand of what you're doing, you're kind of just throwing numbers at it. You're either wasting it or not performing correctly.
Right. Yeah, well, we appreciate you touching base on the hydraulics section of it. We do get a lot of questions on that. So I know that's a little bit put in layman's term for people, and, we're trying to kind of answer some of these questions. So we appreciate you going through that. So let's jump into the questions that you received and you've given to us, and we've kind of worked together to build. The first one here is, what is the single most important thing to do to ensure you have good hydraulics on a pool?
So the most important thing you can do is look at your velocity of the system. Slow the water down as much as you can. The reason why is velocity is what is the biggest driving factor in how much friction loss you have in your plumbing system. If you can reduce your velocity in half, it pulls your friction loss down by 4. So it's not linear. As you move up in velocity, it's not like if you double velocity, you double your friction loss, you actually quadruple it. So velocity is the biggest thing that you can do. It can help you overcome things like a lot of fittings, too many turns, lengths of pipe. So the way we control velocity is the size of the plumbing. So I guess to more directly answer that question, the single most important thing you can do is size your plumbing large enough to have your velocities low. The velocities that you want to have, by the way, for plumbing systems, if you're doing it right, doing it great, 4 feet per second on suction side, 6 feet per second on return side. And Maricopa County actually allows us, Maricopa County is where we are locally, they actually allow us to have much higher than that. But if you're building at 4 on suction and 6 feet per second on return, you're going to be building really sound hydraulically built pools.
Very nice, very nice. Is there a way to improve the hydraulics of an existing system if the pool cannot be replumbed?
Yeah, so we get that question a lot too. Everybody's interested in hydraulics. They want to take something that they got, but they can't replumb the whole pool necessarily. So the best thing to do is look at the equipment set, remove any unnecessary fittings. I'm sure you guys have seen before when you go out and somebody's added 3 or 4 90s here or there, changing equipment out. So if you can pull those unnecessary fittings out, if cavitation's a factor, remember cavitation is when your pump is drawing water in so high, the vacuum is so high that it's pulling the air out of solution and the air bubbles are basically exploding or imploding on the impeller. So you get that really loud churning air noise. So if cavitation is a factor, you can dig up the suction lines and move them out. Sometimes you got to plug a skimmer, plug a vacuum line or whatever to do it, but get your 5 times the suction inlet size in front of the pump. Talk about that here in a little bit, I'm sure, too, but you want to have some distance between the front of the pump and the first elbow. That's a huge way to help things hydraulically. And then make sure you have a heater bypass. If we go out on some of these older systems, the heater won't have a bypass. Heaters work great at 40 or 50 gallons a minute to heat water. You don't need to rip water through a heat exchanger. So if your demand for the pool is 90 and you have a heater in line and you're feeding 90 through it, if you put a bypass on that heater and you bypass 50 and leave 40 at the heater, well, your head loss drops because now you're not forcing all that water through a tube exchanger and you're only bypassing the amount of water that you need to get to it. And that's another huge thing you can do on an existing equipment set.
Yeah, that's something we do with quite a bit. If you're plumbing things, you can't really always dig up the shell. So
right.
It's difficult to try to find those, pieces that can help hydraulically. So appreciate that. And speaking of existing pools, how come so many people get away with having undersized pipes or, not really following the best hydraulic process?
Yeah, people ask, well, I've always done it this way and it's never been a problem. A lot of the things that happen from having undersized plumbing are hidden to the eye. You can't tell. I'll give you a good example of one of those. Therapy jets. People underfeed therapy jets all the time. They'll try and put more than 6 on a filter system. It's not likely that you can ever get more than 6 therapies on a filter system if you have a filter and a heater. You just can't deliver enough water. So what happens is, to an untrained person, the jet works. I see the water coming out. I see the air coming out. But what happens is at lower GPM ranges, it will not develop enough vacuum at the venturi tee to pull the air down into the water stream and mix. So I don't know if you've ever been out to a pool where you've seen, we call it volcano bubbles. All of a sudden it looks like bubbles just coming up. Yeah. Well, that's because the air is coming out of the venturi tee, and it's staying on top of the water flow and just bubbling up. It's not getting pulled in and mixed into a stream. So to some people, they might not even realize the jet's not working right. They think everything's fine, but it's not. It's not performing how it should. Other things that you can't see, if you undersize all the plumbing, is the pumps are working a lot harder, you're using a lot more energy, and you're probably, hurting your pool equipment. So yeah, it's tough to explain to people sometimes that it's really important because, they may not understand that not everything can be seen immediately.
Right.
It takes years sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like that's a pretty big issue because, when you're building a pool, you're not really sticking around with years to come and,
right.
seeing what happens after you, you've plumbed all that in, So
Yeah.
when we on the service side deal with it, I think, it is a factor with how long equipment lasts. And sometimes homeowners will get upset. Like, I just bought this 2 years ago and it's already out, and I think people don't really understand how much hydraulics has to do with some of that, because you're just hammering it. It's where you could actually make it run how it's supposed to, and it would make a big difference.
Yeah, exactly. You want to give it the best chance of lasting.
For sure.
Pentair has a plan to keep your pool sparkling clean. To do that, they recommend using 3 layers for optimal sanitization. Layer 1. Help kill the germs in the water by adding chlorine or a salt system. Layer 2. Neutralize the germs with UV light, because the UV light plus salt or chlorine neutralizes harmful bacteria. And Layer 3. Automate your system with a water chemistry controller to monitor and adjust pH and sanitizer levels automatically. So to recap, Layer 1, chlorine or salt. Layer 2, UV light. Layer 3, manage with automation. All 3 layers equal a happy, clean pool. To learn more on what Pentair has to offer, visit pentair.com or click the link below.
So this question is more of a 2-part question. What are some hydraulic considerations when plumbing a negative edge or perimeter overflow? And how do you calculate the flow for those types of pools to ensure that they spill over properly?
Yeah, people are, getting into these perimeter overflow pools are everywhere now. They're doing negative edges. They want to know, what are some things that I need to allow for or account for? So it's definitely basin or your tank storage size. A lot of times these things are getting built and there's not enough time put into how big should this storage basin be? How big should the negative edge basin be? And it's totally based on the geometry of the pool and the spa. There's a ton of variables. I think we'll get into that a little bit later, specifically, but that's one major factor is consideration for the negative edge basin or the storage tank size. You also have to, when you have a negative edge or a perimeter overflow, you've got an elevation change in where the water is ending up after it spills the edge. So you got to plumb it in such a way that you can keep the suction lines full. And some of the tricks that we do for that are we'll locate a suction side check valve down closer to the basin or the tank. That way the suction line always stays full, because you're generally lifting water at a few feet higher than you would normally. You also have to plumb it in such a way that you don't have a situation where the pool, which is higher than your basin or your storage tank, can drain backwards. So you're looking at check valves. There's also a device called an atmospheric breaker, which is basically another mechanical means to break a siphon. So you want to have provisions in the plumbing that you can prevent it from becoming catastrophic, because sometimes if you lose a whole pool to a basin or a storage tank, it's a big deal. The flow rates, these are very general flow rates that we tell people, but a negative edge is generally 5 gallons per minute per linear foot of edge. So if the whole backside of the pool is a negative edge and let's say it's 40 feet across, you would figure 40 linear feet of spillway edge at 5 gallons per minute. You would go up or down on that number if the backside of it looked like a water feature, you needed a ton of water over the edge, or if you needed less water over the edge, but that's a general term. For a perimeter overflow, the number that we're using the most is 1.6 gallons per minute per linear foot. And what that gives you is weir head of 1/8 of an inch. So what that means is the whole pool surface, if you feed it 1.6 gallons per minute per linear foot, it's going to give you 1/8 inch of rise as it crests that edge and falls into your gutter. So that gives you 1/8 inch that you can play with on your tile if your tile was a little bit out, 1/16 or something like that. So those are the two numbers. 5 gallons per minute for a negative edge per linear foot, very basic. Perimeter overflow, you would take the amount of perimeter that is spilling times 1.6 gallons per minute, and those will keep you pretty safe.
Yeah. I feel like there's so much involved in the perimeter overflow. I mean,
Yeah.
Plumbing is just like one piece of it.
Absolutely.
It has to be tiled correctly. Shotcrete, there's a ton that has to go on with that. But
Yep.
and I feel like it's probably a lot more common of a question now, right? The last couple of years, people building these more often.
It's crazy. Like a lot of the big communities that are getting built now, Shea, Azure, and all these other communities everybody's going to see have them. So everybody wants them. It's crazy. I've never seen so many perimeter overflow pools. And so, yeah, it's important that everybody knows. And we get that question a lot because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you can get yourself in trouble on those for sure.
Do you think it takes more of like an advanced plumber to kind of do those?
Yes, because we go out a lot of times and they'll use like their in-house guys or, whoever the company is that hasn't built very many of them. And it's catastrophe, man. Some of the stuff we see is nuts. So, yeah.
So call a professional.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Is there a quick way that you can size a basin or storage tank for perimeter overflow or negative edge pool?
Yeah, so we also get the phone call a lot going, hey, can you just tell me about how big this basin should be? And the answer is absolutely not. People try and come up with all these, if I figure 5 inches of displacement on the surface area, that'll do it. There is no quick way to arrive. And it goes back to what you just said about hire a professional. You need to hire somebody that can factor in site specifically factor in all of the pieces, because some of these are just some of the things that go into sizing a basin or a negative edge. Okay, so if you've asked this question to somebody before, hear this. So it's bather load, which is how much water is displaced by swimmers once they get in, because on a negative edge or a perimeter overflow pool, there's no freeboard, it's called, in the pool. Like any water that rises spills over the edge. So you got bather load. If there's no bathers, you got wind that's going to blow water out of the pool, so you got to factor in that. You got an anti-vortex height in your surge tank or your basin. And what that means is you can never drop below 12 to 18 inches of water in your basin, depending on how many suction inlets you have, or else you'll draw air into your pump. So that's a factor. Water in transit. How big is your collection system? How big is the gravity system that's going to be carrying water down to your basin or your storage tank? That could be a significant amount of gallons just right there that you're handling, and depending on the geometry of your tank or your basin, that could amount to a lot of depth. Another big one is rain harvest. A lot of people, I should say, don't factor in that when it rains and you have a basin that's sized just for those other factors we just spoke about, now you're going to introduce, a bunch of rainwater. Where's it going to go? It's not like it's going to evaporate. It's probably going to flow out. So you got to account for how much rain harvest you want to have in there. And then overflow freeboard. The other thing that's crazy about these pools is sometimes they can be very dangerous if they overflow. So you want to have a buffer. We call it overflow or freeboard. You want to have a buffer in there where if something went wrong, if the pool service guy was changing a check valve and he lost, a certain amount, or let's say you have to service the spa and you need to drain the spa into the pool, you got to have these factors built in. Where does that water go? Because especially on reverse negative edges that face the house, if that water comes out of the negative edge, it goes in the house. Or let's say you're on a hillside and it goes down the hill, it could go into your neighbor's house. So it's important to factor that too. So again, there is no easy way to look at it. Definitely hire a professional. There's not a simple math equation.
Yeah, I mean, you can't answer that question on the phone?
Yeah,
come on, man.
That's what people think. They're like, hey, so it's like a 20 by 20. What do I need for a basin? It's like, no, not close.
Yeah, those are definitely super complicated. I mean, that's so funny you get asked that. I saw in your notes you said stop asking.
Yeah.
I was laughing when I saw that because it's you must get that asked a lot. Then.
Yeah, we do. It's crazy. It's nuts. And then and if you do tell them, they write it down. They go with that like the Bible. And then six months later, they're like, hey, I threw in that 5x5 surge tank. And they're like, you didn't tell me this thing was 8,000 square feet. So that's crazy.
Yeah. One thing I'll throw in again, please plumb in vac ports in negative edges for us.
Super. Or in tanks too.
Or in tanks, yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're super difficult to clean, especially if there's no vacuum port. So
yeah, that's a good call. Definitely. We're guilty of that sometimes too.
Man, it makes a big difference for sure.
Yeah.
So those were some of the more direct hydraulic questions. And you also received a lot of plumbing questions that still are relevant to hydraulics. So we're going to answer some of those here as well. The first being, is it possible to have too low of a velocity?
Absolutely. So as you start getting into this, you always think, well, I just said the lower the better. Well, there is a limit to that. And some examples of having too low velocity would be if you had a suction line and you were running it at 1 foot per second instead of 4 to 6, you won't get debris out. The debris needs to have enough force enacted on it to pull it into the pump. The other place it's really important is gravity drains or in gutters around a pool. So gravity drains are the collection system when you have a perimeter overflow. It flows into pipes and it just flows by gravity. It's not under any suction from the pump. So if debris gets in that pipe and there's not enough velocity to scour the pipe, meaning to basically clean the pipe as it goes, then debris can just get trapped. Another thing with low velocity this is kind of like low velocity is low flow. If you have a perimeter overflow pool, let's say it's 100 perimeter and it's spilling on all sides. Well, if your flow is too low, you might have areas in that gutter that never collect water because the gutter is very efficient at getting water out into the gravity system. And what can happen there is algae can start to build. You can get debris that sets in certain places in that gutter system. So it's important that you never drop the velocity so low that you're not getting everything through the plumbing system, and that you have enough flow, volume of water moving through those type of systems that you don't get collection of debris. It's kind of like a sewer system in a house. You know, if the flow was too low, it would just block. So yeah, we've definitely run into that. We had a few jobs that we went out on and did some repairs that were like that.
How would you see something that's low velocity? What would make that happen?
So if they plumb, when we plumb gravity drains, we plumb them at a 1/4 inch drop. It's called 2% slope. It's basically a 1/4 inch per 4 feet. Okay. So if you plumb that, let's say level or not quite that much slope, water's going to move slower through there. Okay, we want to be about 3 feet to 4 feet per second on a gravity drain. If you drop below that, the water isn't rushing through the pipe. It's more like just meandering through the pipe, and stuff can settle. Heavy stuff, leaves.
Awesome. So this next question we get asked a lot as well, and being the service side, and you kind of touched on it earlier, but what's a rule for a straight pipe length in front of a pump on the suction side, and why?
Okay, so it's 5 times the suction diameter of the port on the pump. So if the IntelliFlow is a 2-inch inlet, it would be 10 inches of straight pipe in front. But another thing that's really important that's less talked about is you don't want to have, if you're running a 3-inch suction from the pool and you get up to the pump, you don't want to carry that 3-inch right up to the nose of the pump and reduce it right at the pump. You want to reduce it back out at that 10 inches. And this was a conversation I had with John Watt about a year ago. We kept having pumps that they would still develop air bubbles. We would have 10, 15 inches of straight 3-inch pipe in front of the IntelliFlow, and we'd still get air bubbles. And what's going on? Well, what's happening is when you make a change in plumbing size that close to the nose, it goes from it's flowing really slow in a 3-inch pipe, and then all of a sudden it noses down to 2-inch, and the velocity picks up quickly, and that's when the air comes out of solution. You drop the pressure in the water, the air comes right out of solution. So by having that plumbing size change out at the front of that straight pipe, it allows the water to become from turbulent to smooth flow again on the way into the pump. So, that was something that we learned after having those issues. And like I said, we had to reach out to John Watt and kind of get to the bottom of it. But that's what that is. So 5 times the suction diameter, straight pipe in front, make all of your reductions in plumbing size out before that.
Yeah. Well, what if, they're not always perfect, or if there's been repairs done before, how would you try to accomplish that, on like an existing pad?
Yeah, so if you can't push the pad back, let's say it's against the wall and you can't push it back any, the only thing you can do is dig it up and cut the plumbing underground and move the suctions away from the pad, which can sometimes be tough, especially if the pool has water.
Yeah.
But yeah.
How would you do that? You would have to plumb it out further away from the pump, basically cut it down and replumb it.
Exactly. So what we try and do is most plumbing is installed 12 to 18 inches deep. So we would dig up that area and you would find how the plumbing is routing in, and then cut it and actually just like cut it back closer to the pool, bring up your new risers, and then replumb it like that. Sometimes it's crazy when you dig it up underground and you end up having to do some crazy stuff, but it's always better to try than not.
Yeah. Well, in those cases, we didn't do it much, but I think it would be very good to maybe hire somebody like you guys or some plumbers that actually do that in those cases, instead of trying to bump up a pump it right against a pipe, and take away that, because you're kind of doing the customer a disservice by like not having the plumbing correctly. So in those cases, like I never really thought of that before now, but it would be, I think, cool to have somebody come out and replumb it if that's necessary. That way it's getting done the right way. And I'm sure the homeowners, for the most part would understand. Maybe they might not want to pay for it, but
right. Yeah, it's another one of those things. The customer might be like, "Well, I don't know the difference," but we have some guys that we work with that have us do their repairs, pool service guys, and they're all great guys. That's why they have us out there, because they don't want to just slap it together. We got probably a handful of those guys that we do work for regularly.
Well, sometimes it's cemented in, or you can't dig it up. Like, what are some creative ways that you would be able to make that better?
Yeah, so you can change the orientation of the equipment. Sometimes if the plumbing is, coming up out of the ground, like you said, it's in concrete, and then you got your equipment directly behind it, sometimes you can move the equipment to the right or to the left. And even though you're going to take now a turn with the plumbing before you get in, you can still get that length of pipe in front of it where you could do that. Or you could just give yourself more room in general to clean things up. Definitely.
Yeah, I've seen that a few times. Now I know why.
Yeah. What the hell's going on here?
For sure. So, I mean, sometimes you'll see air bubbles in the pump when there isn't really a suction leak or anything. What do you think is the cause of that?
Yeah, so that is definitely when there is high vacuum in the front of the pump. Okay, so imagine water, it contains air in solution. So the only way to get that air out, well, there's two ways to get it out. You can boil it, or you can lower the pressure of that water to the point where the air will come out of solution. So what's happening when you see air bubbles, if there's not a suction leak, is that pump is under super high vacuum, 8, 10, whatever it is running. So the air is actually escaping that water solution, and then that develops. And then as soon as it hits the pump basket and it goes through the impeller, it's pressurized again. The air goes back in solution, most of it. Sometimes the air can actually make it back in the form of bubbles, champagne bubbles or whatever, to the pool. But if there's constantly bubbles in the pump, if you were to put a vacuum gauge in the pump suction port, you'd probably see you're running super high vacuum, and it's just pulling the air right out of solution, right at the pump basket.
How would you change that?
So the only way to change that is if it's a variable speed, lower the speed of the pump, because that's what it is. Your velocity is way too high. That's how you create low pressure, is high vacuum, high velocity. So lower the speed of the pump. The other way would be the 5 times suction diameter in front. Sometimes it can just be the difference between having that turbulence right there at the nose of the pump or not, and having that happen. That'll help a lot too.
How would you explain that to a customer, if they don't understand, they think there's a leak,
Yeah.
And if it wasn't you who plumbed it in or something, like sometimes you gotta have that conversation.
Yeah. So most customers nowadays, they're smart enough to Google anything you tell them, right? So I mean, it's pretty readily available online. They can go and see, luckily this is all science, right? So it's not subjective, it's all very objective. So when you explain it to them, especially if, maybe after today you listen to this podcast and you never understood that's what's happening. You never understood it was high velocity, low pressure, and that's why air comes out of the solution. Maybe now when you talk to that customer intelligently about it, they're going to trust you and they're going to go look it up and realize it's real. Sometimes that doesn't work and they don't believe you, and then you have to actually pressure test it and show them, look, it's not leaking, but it still has air bubbles, and this is all it can be, because that's really all it can be.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's interesting, man.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's so important to understand terminology, because again, you can talk over the homeowner a little bit, and then if they do Google it, it's a real thing.
Yeah.
If you don't know what you're saying or how you're saying it, then you just kind of look dumb sometimes.
Right. Yeah. And they go,
and that makes them question it without, even if you're correct, they're still going to question you if you don't know what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've seen that quite a bit, and now that's a good way to explain it for sure. So speaking of air bubbles, a lot of times you'll see leaf canisters plumbed in front of the pumps, and particularly like the Paramount EDC system. Why do they typically have air bubbles in them?
Yeah, so we get that phone call a ton too, and it's especially prevalent with the EDC, which is Paramount's unit, and it's because air is buoyant. When you take the lid off and you change or you dump the debris and you put it back in, air is going to get in there, and then you start to prime the pump. Water starts to flow through the plumbing. It enters the EDC and then into the pump. So that air that's trapped in the top is very buoyant. It wants to repel or rise up, whereas the pump is trying to draw everything down. And because the canister is so big, there's not that much friction from the water coming in, because it's coming in and it's just in this huge volume of this EDC. So it's not very turbulent. It's not very, water is sticky when it moves through, right? It's got friction. Mm-hmm. So if you were to put it in a smaller container and add air to it, it would hold onto that air and pull it right through to the pump. But in this case, it's slowing way down when it gets into the EDC. So it's coming through the plumbing line at X velocity, and then it hits this EDC, which is much bigger. It slows way down. It's not as sticky, quote unquote. So it can't just grab that air and pull it out. Plus that air is resisting it because it's buoyant. So a lot of times what you'll actually see happen is the water, if you look in the top of the EDC and the pump's running at 1200 or 2000 RPMs, you'll see that you can actually see the water flow in and dump into the bottom of the EDC, but the top half never gets water, not unless you put it at 3450 and let that sucker rip for a while. And yeah, it's just because it's so much bigger than the pipe that's delivering water to it. It doesn't need to be completely full for it to serve the suction that's coming out of the bottom of it. But a lot of customers, a lot of people, they interpret that as, oh, there's a problem, this isn't priming. And that's just not the case. I mean, it's okay. If your pump is drawing air at the same time, maybe we got a problem. But if your pump is fully primed and the EDC is just allowing enough water to come in and make it into the bottom and out to the pump, that's totally normal. Nothing to be worried about.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah.
In Arizona here, we typically deal with a lot more pools below grade, but it's possible that pools need to be plumbed above grade. So what's the highest point a pump itself can be plumbed over a body of water and still work properly?
Yeah, so it relates to the atmospheric pressure. So remember how earlier we were talking about a pump creates a vacuum and then water moves under atmospheric pressure through the plumbing system into that low pressure zone that the pump's creating in the pump pot. So the limit to that at our air pressure here is about 25 feet. So it doesn't matter, if you pulled a perfect vacuum in a pump, if you could, which you can't, you could only get to as much pressure that the atmosphere will exert on the body of water, what it would force up a complete vacuum. And that number is about 25 feet. So if you ever run into that, if you're like, oh, I got a basin, like let's say where we see it is, let's say that a basement home. Sometimes in the big window wells, they will have like a water feature that drops down into the basement, and they look cool. That's probably the only place that we really see this. So what you do is pumps can only do about 25 foot ahead on the suction side, right? So if you add up all the friction losses, about 25 feet, and then beyond that, that's it, because that's all you can get. But on the pressure side, you can get 80, 100, 120, whatever. You can put a sump pump in, which is down at that lower level, and it can pump up in excess of 25 feet.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, the number to keep in mind is 25 feet.
Yeah.
Or less.
And how do you keep water in the pipes, if you're emptying the baskets or something? How do you typically keep water in pipes if it's that high?
We'll do a suction side check valve. We call it a foot check down in the basin itself. And then it's really important that up by the pump you put a two-way valve, because sometimes you need to service that check valve. And if you take that check valve flapper out without a service valve up at the pump that you can close, it's just going to drain the whole line and you're going to fight it. So we always do a combination of a check valve down at the lower elevation and then a service valve right in front of the pump.
So the check valve below would hold the water in the pipe.
Yeah, a check valve only allows water to go one way. So you put it down in the bottom. As soon as that line's full, it can never rush back out.
Yeah. Well, all the pools I've worked on like that don't have that.
Don't have that? Yeah.
Sit there trying to plumb it for a freaking hour.
Yeah. Add water.
Or trying to prime it, I mean.
Add water, add water.
Yeah.
That sucks.
Well, that's how you do it the right way.
Yeah. Yep.
Since 1979, Lion Financial has helped make backyard dreams come true nationwide. Lion Financial is a specialist in pool financing solutions, offering low rates, long terms, and unmatched customer service. Their programs offer your customers the best in pool financing options, with programs available for scores of 640 and above. Lion Financial is the industry leader, funding over $1 billion in pools in 2020. Lion Financial is now offering loans up to $125,000. Also, due to popular demand, their 2.99% special for a 3-year term has been extended through 2021. Lion Financial's expertise is unique to pools, not just any type of loan. They are a partner with both the homeowner and the pool builder until the project is completed, ensuring pool professionals are paid on time and in full. It is absolutely free for pool contractors to partner with Lion Financial to grow their business. They're also committed to providing an excellent customer service experience. Homeowners will never be charged a consulting fee or prepayment penalties, and pool builders will never be charged a swipe fee for accessing their own hard-earned money. When it comes to something as important as the pool and all the memories that come with it, work with the true professionals who have your best interests in mind. With more than 42 years of experience specializing in pool financing solutions, why trust anyone but the experts? To find out more, listen to episode 94 or click the link below.
How detrimental would you say it is to have the pool equipment plumbed far away from a pool?
Yeah, so a lot of people get scared. A lot of our builders are like, oh, I got to keep it within 40 feet or 50 feet or whatever. Yes, that helps for sure. but it's far less detrimental than most people think. And I'm going to give you a comparison right now to show you. So when you're looking at a plumbing system, the plumbing itself is not a relatively high portion of the friction loss. It's actually the components like the filter. So for example, a 520 cartridge filter, if you were to feed 80 gallons a minute through a 520 cartridge filter, it would give you a 4 psi drop. Well, 4 psi drop is 9.24 feet ahead. Okay, so what I'm telling you is that at 80 gallons a minute, a 520 filter be equivalent to 9.2 feet ahead. Okay, so now imagine the equipment's 100 feet away. If I move 80 gallons a minute through a 2.5 inch pipe, that's only going to give me 4.9 feet ahead. So it would take 200 feet of 2.5 inch pipe from the pool to the equipment to equal the feet of head that a filter will provide in resistance. So just to put things in perspective. So it's not, I mean, where that would get bad is if you undersize the plumbing. But if your plumbing is sized correctly, the plumbing length to the equipment is far less of a variable than actually some of the components in the system. It's very minimal.
Yeah, I get that question a lot too. I've heard people always blame how far away the plumbing is as some of the problems.
Yeah, and if it's plumbed right, man, we can put it. We had a job in Paradise Valley we did a while back. It was 450 feet to the equipment. It was insane, but
wow.
it ran no problem. You know, we ran 4 and 6 inch on the suctions. I mean, we were probably way, back then we were way overdoing it back then, but it worked great. And then you put things, another trick that we do when things are really far away, any component that's going to produce a high head loss, we'll put closer to the pool. Let me give you an example. If you had equipment that was very far away and you had the 6-port, that's the controller that controls the in-floor, that's a pretty high head loss because all the water has to pass through there and it gets restricted by all the ports and gear mechanisms. So there's pretty high head loss there, relatively speaking. So if you put that out by the pool, then you can feed water there under very low restriction, and then that head loss happens very close to the pool, and then it only has to travel a short distance from that point to the pool. If it happens back at the equipment, well, you've lost all of your energy because it's absorbed all that head loss right there, and now it's still got 200 feet to go before it gets to the pool.
Oh, wow.
So you want to put things out closer to the pool that are going to be high head loss.
Is that why the pop-up systems are out by the pool a lot of the time?
Yeah,
Wow.
because it is, one part that actually pinches off the plumbing pretty good.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. So
Yeah.
I see them a lot of the time by the pool, and you're always wondering why that
Yeah.
is, but
Yeah.
makes sense now.
Yeah. Another quick thing I'll say too, another trick for builders, sometimes they'll do, let's say the run's 100 feet and they want to do 10 water features on the back of the pool. So a lot of them, to save money, they will have us run one large feed line out and then put an individual valve for each water feature behind the pool. And so what that actually does, if you're like pushing the limits of that pump, what that's actually doing is you're delivering all of that water through a main trunk, and it's seeing all of the head loss for the cumulative total of the GPM coming out of that valve bank. If you put that valve bank back at the equipment and you divide that flow across the 10 lines, now your velocity in each one of those lines out to the pool is 1/10. So you're actually making the total head loss that you're going to experience a lot less. It's kind of hard to get your head around, I think, for some builders because they want to, number one, save money, and number two, it's kind of tough to understand that, but that it helps because your velocity is, like I said, 1/10 of what it would have been in that main trunk.
Yeah.
Or close, depending on the size.
So you can control it better.
Yeah, you can control it better.
Yeah, that's cool. Why is it you recommend running large suction and return lines if the pump, filter, heater, and valves are reduced at the connection points anyway?
Yeah, I mean, the way to think of it is if you look at a pressure drop chart on a filter or you look at a pressure drop on a heater, all of those figures are built into that component. So we break it up like this. All of the plumbing system is, call that segments A through C, right? So we want to get water from the pool to the equipment with as little head loss as possible, as little friction loss. And then once you hit the component, there's a lot of times nothing you can do. I mean, they're fixed sizes, but if you look at the pressure drop chart, it's all figured in already. So they know what it's going to be at any flow rate, how much pressure drop you're going to get through that. And then when you come out the other side, you can run larger plumbing again. So what that's doing is it's reducing your friction loss in the plumbing before and after. I guess it is like one of those things where you think about it and you're like, man, if they just did 2.5-inch inlet and outlet, well, if you look at a 520 cartridge filter, they make a 2.5 and set of unions for that. But it's still the same filter on the inside. It's still got to go through the same collection system. The pressure drop is still almost exactly the same. So, I mean, think about an impeller too. You know, we run 3-inch suctions. If you look at the eye of an impeller, all that water has to shrink down to make it through the veins. It's just how much velocity it picks up as it goes through. So you don't want to ever get so focused on that you're not running the right size plumbing. I mean, you want to get all the plumbing there at the right size with as least restriction as possible, and then focus on that portion of it.
Awesome. If someone's doing a remodel where the pool has an existing main drain that's 2 inches, will it help if it's upgraded to a 2.5 or a 3-inch plumbing line?
Yeah, in remodels a lot we get that question. Let's say we can't replumb what's under the pool, but we can replumb from the edge back. Does it help to increase it if what's under the pool is 2-inch? Absolutely, because you could look at your flow through the portion that's under the pool, and you would have X amount of friction loss or X amount of head created by that 2-inch run, and then from there back you could decrease your velocity, and then you would pick up less friction loss in that portion of it. So absolutely it helps. Definitely does.
So you would try to get basically as close to the pool shell as possible.
Yep.
Yeah, and then run it to the pool equipment.
Exactly, because even though it's under a higher velocity under the pool, it would be under lower velocity up there, and it would end up like the net result of that whole suction line is it would be less friction loss in that line.
So that's one of the better ways to replumb an existing shell.
Yeah, because you can, it definitely helps anything that you can get your hands on to size correctly.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I've heard you talk about Hartford Loops a few times, and there's some really kind of misunderstanding what they are.
Yeah.
Can you explain what a Hartford Loop is exactly and when you use it?
Yeah, so I've heard people call everything that's not a Hartford Loop a Hartford Loop. It's crazy. It's crazy. If you've ever seen a pool under construction with a spa, you'll usually see a Hartford Loop in the spa. And what it is, it's a section of plumbing that rises higher than the water level in the spa. So Hartford Loop, that term came from boilers. A Hartford Loop in a boiler was basically like a bypass plumbed in between the steam side and the water side to prevent siphon. So imagine it's like an anti-siphon. Okay, so the way that works in spas is you have, in your therapy, you have a water connection and an air connection. When you turn your spa off, water can run back into those plumbing lines and fill them up unless you have a Hartford Loop, because the Hartford Loop, the air line will rise above water level. Water can't, under normal static conditions, rise higher than the water level of the body of water that it's in. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So if you rise the airline higher than that before you run it back in the trench all the way to the equipment, it will never allow water from the spa to fill that airline up.
So you can do it underground before it goes to the equipment?
Yep. Yeah, we usually do it right at the side of the spa, and it's usually sticking up high right at the edge.
And be looped up higher than the rest of the plumbing, basically.
You can also do it if you have a spa that spills on all the edges and there's nowhere that you can put it that close where you can get above water. You can run it 10 feet, 20 feet, and then do it. It's better to have it, somewhere in the run than it is to not have it at all. We can definitely plumb without it. It just takes a lot longer for the venturi to create vacuum and then clear the line. Sometimes you got to use a blower.
Okay.
But yeah, Hartford Loop is not a balancing loop. It's not any of those things. It's basically a anti-siphon or almost like a check valve on the airline.
Is that what it gets confused most with, is like a balancing loop?
People call anything that's a loop a Hartford Loop. Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, that's what it is specifically.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, our last question for today is, what is the difference between a venturi skimmer and a suction skimmer, and when would you recommend using each?
Yeah, so what they are, a suction skimmer is what you see in most pools now. It has suction from the pump. The suction in the bottom pulls water in over the weird flapper. So what's different about a venturi skimmer is instead of using suction force, it uses return pressure. And in the bottom of the skimmer will be a venturi device that accelerates that water flow like we were talking about earlier. Water under velocity, it's sticky, so as it shoots that high pressure jet of water through the body of the skimmer, it attaches to other water, it creates that venturi effect, and it skims using only return pressure. So these were invented on in-floor pools where if you have one pump, and let's say that one pump can produce 80 gallons a minute. Well, if you have a skimmer, like we talked about earlier, that takes 27 to 54 gallons a minute to operate, and you have a main drain that takes 80 to 130, well, you don't want to give up suction to the skimmer. You want to have it all at the drain because that's how you get debris out of the pool. So the in-floor manufacturer said, let's create a skimmer that we don't have to devote any suction to. We'll devote return water. And what's cool about it is a suction skimmer takes 27 to 54 gallons a minute to work properly. A return skimmer only takes 8 to 10 gallons a minute, but it still performs like it was a 27 to 54 gallon a minute suction skimmer. So it's great, especially if you have like a situation where your pump's at the end of what it can produce and you don't want to add a second pump. You start pulling skimmers out, you start pulling off 27 gallon a minute demands and adding back in 10, you can really make up some ground.
Yeah. So what's the venturi effect for those that don't know?
The venturi effect is basically if you send water through a nozzle that reduces, basically, let's say you're feeding through an 1.5 inch pipe, and then at the very end, it's like a conical nozzle, and it shrinks down to 1/4 inch. Well, the water that's coming out is moving a lot faster than it was in the other pipe behind it. And what that does is right where it comes out, it creates a low pressure zone, like we talked about earlier, and all of the water around it tries to move into that low pressure zone. It becomes trapped in that stream of water. So by shooting 8 to 10 gallons a minute through that nozzle, that effect that it has is all that water that's being attracted to that low pressure zone as it comes out the other side of that nozzle, you're actually pulling through 30 to 40 gallons a minute because it's grabbing all that water around the end of the nozzle and drawing it out with it. So
that's dropping the rear door then?
Yeah, exactly. So that water, after it comes through and it captures all that other water, it actually leaves the skimmer body back to the pool down low. And water to replenish that water that's being taken out is coming over the weir door.
Yeah.
They work great.
Yeah. Well, that's pulling the debris off the surface than like a regular suction skimmer would.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's cool. And you would more commonly see those, you said, like on, in-floor systems, right?
Yeah. Single pump in-floor systems. That's like where we see them most. But you can also do it. I'll give you another quick example. If you had a vacuum pool and you had the vacuum running and a skimmer, you would need about 77 gallons a minute. Well, if you move instead of a suction skimmer, if all of a sudden you make that a return skimmer, now all you need to serve is 50 gallons a minute. So you can turn the pump speed way down.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
that's pretty cool. I don't know if I've seen it much like that, but that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, because you don't have that. You're trading 27 gallons a minute for 10. It's great.
On an in-floor system, what if you needed to vacuum it? Well, you have to pull out the bottom piece, right?
Yeah. Yeah, unless you have a dedicated vac port, you usually got to pull out the little venturi nozzle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, it's been awesome, man. We talked about discussing hydraulics based on, like we talked about, you got received questions from people, so appreciate you answering a lot of those. And where can people reach out to you if they have more questions?
So you can check me out on Instagram. I'm bearded_plumber. A lot of people last time reached out, had a couple questions. Like you said, we tried to incorporate them here. This was just kind of touching on everything that kind of seems to be most commonly asked. And yeah, if anybody has any questions or needs anything, reach out to me. There are a couple people I owe some answers to still from last time. So if that's you, sorry, man, definitely hit me back up and I will try and help out as much as I can. Hopefully everybody learned something today.
Yeah. And let us know if you want to hear other things, anytime, any plumbing questions you got, let us know, let Justin know, and try to answer them at a different time.
Yeah, I'll be back on my 4th and 5th.
Yes.
Just get me a chair with my name
for sure. Well, thanks again, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Hey, Pool Chasers. Thanks for checking out this episode. Did you know that each episode has its own page on our website? This is where you can find more information about the guest and episode topic, as well as all the resources that we discuss throughout the show. To get to the webpage, click the link below. Also below, you will find links to the sponsors of the show, as well as links to follow us on our social media channels. On our channels, you will find some of our favorite clips and bonus material. Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Our tag is Pool Chasers. We also have a Facebook group for the Pool Chasers community. Here you will find like-minded professionals all looking to make each other better. One last thing. If the episode has brought you value, please check out our Patreon page to support us. And if you could please rate and review the podcast We would love to hear what your favorite topics are. Thank you for your time and your ear.
See you out there, pool chasers.